Hey, everybody, and we're live. Happy Wednesday to you. We're so happy to be back with you, and we've got a great show. So let's get right to it. We have, first and foremost, my co host, a fantastic, amazing veterinarian. He's actually in Sydney area, in Sydney, Australia area. So it's about 7:30 a.m. his time. So welcome him with a good morning. Hello, Ian.
Good morning, Rob. Great to be here. I've even had my coffee this morning.
Okay, good. Well, we were able to start you at 7:30 instead of 7, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed like the last time. Well, good. Let's get our guest right on, and we're really excited because both of us are very good friends of Rob's, and he's a great guy. Rob actually doesn't live very far from me, and he's actually a real friend. I mean, I've had dinner at his house, and I'm in love with his dog and his animals, and he's a really great guy. He's a very, very talented holistic veterinarian, world renowned for, gosh, we'll have to ask Rob. For many, many, many years, he was the face of RX Vitamins, the pet line, which is an amazing supplement company. It's one I used. So we're very happy to welcome Dr. Rob Silver.
And
Hey, Rob.
Hi, Rob and Ian. I'm very happy to be here today. This is great.
Rob, it is fantastic to see you again. It's been a while. We last got together in Canada. I think it's 2018.
Yep.
But and you helped me get my latest venue with the AHVMA, where we sadly failed to meet. But anyway, it's great to see you again.
It is. It's terrific. And I'm really excited to learn more about what you've been doing with Rob. Sounds like some really groundbreaking work developing some products to support the microbiome.
Rob, that is exactly what we're doing. And I'm excited to be part of this venture with Gussie's Gut. And I'm also excited to be finding out what it is that you're doing, because I believe you have a great deal more to contribute. You have a great deal to contribute. And your latest venture is absolutely brilliant, as I understand it. So we're on board in a big way with you, Rob Silver.
Thank you. So Rob, let's talk about what you're up to right now. Let's talk about your company, Well Pet Dispensary.
Okay. Well, I've not been idle since I've seen you last, Ian, and I have several irons in the fire, so to speak, or a lot of things on my plate. But I have an e-commerce site. I've got a website. It's called, there it is, wellpetdispensary.com. And on this site, I sell products that most of which I have personally designed and manufactured through either by myself or through other companies that address serious problems in pets. I've retired from veterinary practice, but I miss it. I miss helping the critters, and I miss the intellectual challenge of trying to understand medical problems. And so this website is a way for me to continue to serve my four-legged friends by providing them with supplements. And I do provide some advice. I have to be careful about giving advice, that's not a doctor-patient type of relationship. I kind of say what I'm doing is giving advice on product selection, which I actually am, and try to avoid making diagnoses and medical and giving actual real medical advice. And so I'm doing pretty well. And we sell CBD on this website, and I've become a bit of a global expert on CBD. I've developed my own product line called Doc Silver Naturals, and I'm blending CBD with another cannabinoid from the plant called CBG. And what we have found is the blend of these two seems to be more powerful than either one of them in terms of inflammation, in terms of pain, in terms of anxiety, and also in terms of epilepsy, at least anecdotally speaking, because we don't have objective studies to support this information that I've just told you. But this is what I've heard from hundreds and hundreds of reports from my customers over the last couple of years. So, Well Pet Dispensary is great. Plus, I've just recently joined a Canadian company, an amazing Canadian company called Real Mushrooms, because my interest in CBD has led me naturally down the road to look at mushrooms as being another amazing source of all these bioactive molecules, including an incredible source of fiber for the microbiome. by the way. So, so I'm working with real mushrooms to develop a pet line for them. Capsules and powders and soft chews and blended mixtures of mushrooms and herbs that have specific clinical effects and purposes. And we're just getting started. We've only got our first, I think, 6 or 7 products so far. We've got another 6 or 7 that are going to be coming, that we're going to be launching within the next 12 months. So it's a good company. They're very conscious. They're very education and research forward, and they're very big on making sure that their products are extremely clean, and they're very transparent about all of their sources and information. I'm also working on finishing my second book. My first book was Medical Marijuana and Your Pet, was self-published. I'm about 250 pages into my second book, which is a manual of how to use CBD and cannabis and how to use medical mushrooms for a variety of medical problems in dogs and in cats and in horses, mainly dogs, but we talk about the other species as well. And I have a pet health guide where I actually go through 5 different medical conditions that pets can get that are remediable through mushrooms and CBD. And I talk about the whole thing, the conventional medicine, integrative approaches, what are actual integrative supplements you can use with it, diagnostic tests you need, and how do you use CBD and mushrooms in that. So I'm working on that. It's taken time to get that going. And I think, and I've got a life too. Wow. What an idea. So that's pretty much me in the nutshell.
Wow, that is incredible, Rob. I am just so pleased to hear all that. You are such an energetic person and so full of information and knowledge. Tell me this: are you able to export your, particularly for want of a better word, marijuana products? Are you able to export them overseas?
Well, there actually is a better word than marijuana for these products, Ian, because marijuana is globally illegal because of the THC and is smuggled. We'd call it cannabis now. It's a classier name, and cannabis would include hemp, which has almost no THC, or it could include what it was commonly used to be called marijuana, which a lot of people enjoy to use recreationally, but has pretty strong medical purposes as well. We are starting to see more countries allowing the importation of CBD products without THC in them, and but Australia has some of the most restrictive importation regulations there is. Health, I don't know what the Ministry of Health is called. I know in Canada it's Health Canada, in US it's FDA, but they're very restrictive by it. And at the same time, there is a nascent industry in Australia of hemp and also cannabis that's just starting to get commercialized and off the ground. And I suspect that an island such as Australia would prefer to use its own stuff versus importing it from outside. And certainly the conditions in Australia are ripe for growing great shit.
I think it's Tasmania where they're doing that, Rob. I just find it ironic that many years ago, sailors used to get the hemp ropes and actually smoke those.
Well, they would be pretty worthless to smoke, but
yeah, that's right.
Whatever turns their crank,
No, yes, we love the idea of cannabis, and we just wish we could import your products. But you are right. Our drug regulators here are very strong in what we're allowed to bring in.
I wish I could send them over too. They don't have THC in them. And I'm starting to sell them to veterinarians locally here in the U.S. I'm selling to them wholesale, and so that's going over pretty good. A lot of vets got used to using hemp from the RX Vitamins products that I designed for them, because I introduced hemp for the first time ever for a veterinary company with RX Vitamins in 2015. And I've taken the same principles that I used to create the hemp RX products and have put those into the Doc Silver Natural products, but added the CBG and changed the carrier oil to medium chain triglycerides, which I think are much more palatable and have some medicinal benefits as well, as compared to like olive oil or hemp seed oil.
Well, Rob, will you tell us, I do believe this, the CBG is what we were talking about with the acidity. We talked about this at when we had dinner last. Will you tell us a little bit why that's so interesting and why, it's relatively new, so a lot of people don't know about it?
Well, there's been a lot of excitement in the last 5 or 6 years about CBD. And even though the FDA hasn't gotten to regulate it yet, everybody's jumping to make business with it. So much so that that even in the absence of the FDA regulating, it has become like a common law thing. So it's going to be impossible for the FDA to remove it. Um, but what I was referring to is as the CBD industry is getting more competitive, companies are looking at some of the other molecules that are in the plant because there's 50, 100 molecules, all of which have equal potency to the CBD. They just aren't manufactured in as large amounts as CBD. Some of them even have better effects than CBD in certain realms. So what I was talking with you about when we had that meal was that um, over the years of growing marijuana to get high, you have to heat the plant in order to drive off the acid group that is on the THC, because the plant grows all these molecules in an acid format. And what's interesting is that THC, when it's in its acid format, doesn't get you high. So for years, when they started using hemp, they thought, well, gee, we're going to have to heat this stuff in order to activate it because that's what we have to do with THC. Then somewhere along the line, someone said, well, what if we don't? What about raw CBD? CBD acid, or what about raw THC acid? How good is that? Well, they derived that from the plant. Then they did some benchtop tests to compare their COX-2 inhibition function. Now, COX-2 is an enzyme that promotes inflammation in the body, and drugs that we have like NSAIDs, like carprofen or Advil, work on inhibiting that COX-2 enzyme, which reduces the pain. Well, when they compared the ability to inhibit COX-2 enzymes, they found that the acidic form of CBD was about 20 times stronger than the CBD itself in terms of relieving pain. But they also measured CBG, which is another molecule in the plant that is not the acidic form, but the non-acidic form, because it has already been heated. And they compared that to the COX-2 inhibition of CBD and found that it had the same ability as the acid form to reduce inflammation and reduce pain. I take both for I'm getting old, got a bunch of arthritic pain. So I take both for my pain, and I find both to be pretty good. The problem with the acidic form of CBD is the taste is awful. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to make something that'll get into an animal without a little bit of a struggle. So we're still kind of trying to figure that piece out. But it's fascinating. It's the plant is like a book, and you just keep turning a leaf to a new chapter, to a new molecule that you get all absorbed about. And so it's an interesting industry. But I'm finding that the mushroom industry is actually even more interesting because each mushroom is like its own cannabis plant with 100 or 150 different molecules, and each one is different mushroom to mushroom, except for the beta glucans, which they all have in common. And these beta glucans are non-soluble fiber that actually also has a benefit on the microbiome. So this would probably be a good place for me to start learning more about what you guys are doing with the microbiome. I'm pretty knowledgeable about the microbiome, but not nearly as knowledgeable, I am certain, as you are, Ian. And so I am, even with these earphones in, I'm all ears. I want to learn today from you.
And I want to learn from you, Rob. Tell me, I'm really fascinated now with all this new information coming out about the compounds present in both medicinal mushrooms and also in cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any companies out there attempting to synthesize any of these compounds?
Well, yeast is a very favored bio factory for manufacturing these types of molecules. They hijack the genetic code of the yeast and make it kick out these molecules. They started a long time ago doing that with like tryptophan. So there are companies that are looking at kicking out different single molecules that they encode in the yeast from the cannabis plant. The big difference, though, is that these are single molecules. And I'm sure you appreciate, as I do, as someone who has been working with natural therapies for so many years, that there is something special about the wholeness of that plant, the wholeness of that animal if you're feeding it. There is something to that, the prey diet concept, when you're talking about feeding the whole animal with the glandulars and everything else. And so you don't get the same thing. You get a very good, purified, isolated, clean single molecule when you're using those yeast biofactories or other ways of creating those things molecularly. Interestingly enough, they also find some of the same molecules in cannabis they find in other plants as well. For instance, echinacea has acrylamides. And the truffles, mushroom truffles, contains anandamide, which is the neurotransmitter that we contain. That is what cannabis works on. It's the part of our endocannabinoid system. And maca, Peruvian ginseng, so to speak, also has some endocannabinoid, cannabinomimetics, we call these types of plants. So, the plant kingdom is pretty amazing, really.
Of course,
Hmm.
Rob, I think everybody should know that when they are synthesized and used singularly as drugs, then the side effects, which are not going to be present because of the modifying effects of all those other chemicals within the natural plant, they're gone. And so that's when we get all these side effects.
Yes, in fact, there are some good studies in cannabis where they take the isolated CBD, they call that isolate, and they compare that to the full spectrum CBD, which has all the other molecules in it. And they find that you need a lower dose to get good results, and you always have fewer side effects when you're using the whole plant. And there's some good published studies that support that.
And of course, one of the things, Rob, when they're producing, or when you're producing medical marijuana products, it's how do you standardize the actives in that?
I'm sorry, how do you do what? I'm sorry.
How do you standardize the actives, the one that you're actually attempting?
Well, that's one of the problems with plant medicine,
Yes.
is that you're going to have variation. Even if you have the same genetics, you'll have variation from season to season, from soil to soil, from climate to climate, that you might be growing the same genetics in. So it's difficult to standardize them to a very precise tolerance if you're talking about, but the plants themselves are already relatively standardized within a certain range, because their genetics will only allow them to produce a certain percentage of THC, and all the other molecules fall in place, with the THC, because the primary molecule is the acidic form of CBG, which then separates into CBD or THC. So you can't, THC and CBD, interestingly, have the exact same molecular formula. They only differ in one bond. And that's the difference between being psychoactive and being psychosupportive, which is how I would describe those two. It's a fascinating topic. I could go on forever about this, and I probably will if you don't stop me.
To standardize, if you're going to standardize the active component, you have to standardize the growing conditions. Would that be right?
Yes, and in fact, in commercial cannabis growing operations, they also standardize the additives, the nutrients that they add, the soil. Everything is, they keep very close records of everything, and then based on what their output is, and even as far as how many photons of light they're receiving over a period of time, it's developed into a huge science. There's all sorts of, apps for that, and tools that you can, set up with your, like your remote internet type of, like they do the home thing now. And so they standardize it so they can reproduce it as closely as they can. But there's natural variation, even on a given plant, because the plant has all these little flowers on it. The flowers have these little, hairs that produce the resin, and that's where you get the goodies. But, you have the top of the plant that's exposed to sun all the time. You're going to have a much greater potency on the top than you have on the bottom. So the real secret is to analyze. So you know exactly what you've got. And then if you're not taking just the whole plant, you may wind up formulating that plant into something else. And when you do the formulation, you can then formulate it to be a specific standardized potency. But coming right off of the grow, you don't have as much flexibility.
Well, I think that's what's important here, Rob, is that one of the biggest, one of the biggest things against phytomedicine in many ways has been its non-standardization. So it's good to hear that we are actually able to, within good degrees of certainty, standardize these products. I think that makes them much more valuable, say, to the veterinary and medical profession, if they know that within certain limits, this amount of active ingredient is present in the product.
Well, this same kind of standardization of ingredients or constituents in a plant has been used for quite a while. Like, for instance, with milk thistle. You want to know that you're standardized to a certain percentage of silymarin. For practitioners like us, we want to know how we're going to dose the critter. So there has to be some kind of analysis. So they do that. They'll standardize it, which means they might actually add in some of the non-active components of the seed to dilute it down to a certain level, or they may have some extracted stuff they add to it to get to that same standardized level. It's probably a bit tight sphinctered, if I may use that term, by our scientists and by our medical practitioners to feel that they actually need to have that same numerical number of content of things in the plant, because it also speaks to their belief that there's only one thing in that plant that has activity, when in fact it's the whole plant's activity. And instead of, giving them a dosage and then saying, call me tomorrow or whatever, you monitor their feedback on how they're doing with that whole plant, even if it's not standardized. So you say, oh, I think I could probably get away with giving this guy a little less, or, hey, he's not doing well enough, let's give him a little more, because probably in his individuality, he needs more than what the textbook says he needs as a dose. So, I mean, that's integrative medicine. That's treating the individual, and that's what
Absolutely,
you and I do.
Rob.
Yeah.
And I use this in my work with whole foods, and I actually explain to or ask everybody if they understand the word titration, because that's what we're doing. We're titrating the animal and the response to what we're doing, and that is so important.
Exactly.
It's a very difficult concept to get across to your so-called scientifically trained physician, as opposed to your integrative physician. But it's wonderful that you're making that point. It's most important.
Even with drugs, for instance, my wide hair pointer has stage 4 cancer right now here in my home, and we're treating her in hospice fashion and letting her live out her days, however many those may be. And if I were to give her a dosage of a steroid to help stimulate her appetite, and I were to follow the textbook dosage, it would be way too strong for her weakened, frail body. So instead, I've given her a dosage, maybe 20% of what the textbook would recommend, and she is thriving on that in terms of her appetite and her quality of life. So it really, a lot of medical practitioners, they just, they are wedded to these numbers, versus wedded to the effects in the patient. It's medicine means really, you have you examine the patient, you make a hypothesis about what's wrong with them, use basically your hypothesis, you make a plan as far as what to treat them, and then you follow up, and then you modify the plan based on the follow-up. I mean, that's called soaping. We call that in medical records, so it's an iterative process. And I'm sure that when you're I'm just so eager to talk about Gussie's gut and these microbiome products, but I'm sure that when you're looking to find what the appropriate amount of that stuff is to give, it's not necessarily just on a weight basis. A lot of it has to do on the individual's digestive system function, what other foods they're eating in their diet, a variety of things, the phase of the moon, even, who knows.
Rob, it's just occurring to me as we're talking. We've talked about a lot of this privately, one-on-one, but just right now, it's occurred to me that the three of us are in very similar, um, cutting edge frontier nutritional work where, with mushrooms, let's just call it CBD cannabis related, and then now fermentation and vegetables, fruits, herbs, and mushrooms. Um, it's we can understand the miraculousness of it, but we can't always quantify it. And in fact, there really aren't even enough tests to be able to tell us how many, polyphenols and, micronutrients that are these magical constituents that pop up through the process of fermentation. And so, how is it you find, how do you find working in this new frontier of medicine, where you can't always, pick out, be able to document on a piece of paper, this many milligrams of this magical ingredient? How is it you find working within that sort of medicine?
It's not hard. I think you just have to create a model, for what you're trying to what you're trying to find and understand. Your metrics may not be numerical. Your metrics may be something like, the quality of the stool, or even a spring in their step, or things that the je ne sais quoi that we as practitioners don't really know how to evaluate, but the pet's parent does, and they can tell.
Yeah.
One of the cardinal rules I learned early on in practice was always trust the pet parent. They know. They may not know how to say what they know, but they know, and so oftentimes they can be a very good metric as well, because they're there. They'll smell the poo, they'll smell the gas the dog produces, the mouth breath. They'll see the shine on the coat that maybe you didn't notice. I mean, all the things that we would expect to see with healthier digestion, including improved mentation. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like with the mushrooms, everybody wants to know, how do you dose it, and over the years they just dose it by, well, just so many grams of mushrooms per day. Well, I developed a new way of looking at dosing mushrooms by using their standardized beta glucan content, because we do have studies that show us how to standardize based on beta glucan content. With your stuff, what I would do, or what I would want to do, and maybe you've already done it, which would be good, would be to do some microbiome analyses, of a number of quite a few animals, and then give them your stuff and do the microbiome analyses again to show the proof is, hey, we've got better firmicutes to bacteroides ratios, or hey, we don't. Maybe we need to give more, or maybe maybe it's not working.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of our customers we're seeing are doing those. They've done it before, and
Mhm.
because we just launched for sale, that we're going to see in the next several weeks and months that they'll be able to do the afters. We're very excited to be able to share that information. But yeah, you're right, and I like what you said about we can evaluate the joie de vivre of. Isn't that an interesting way to look at it? You're looking at the joy of life of an animal and how that changes. I like that. I like that way of thinking.
I think
There's a
that's
lot.
the art of medicine, Rob
Yes,
and
true.
Rob. Um,
Rob
listening
squared.
listening to Rob, you mentioned Rob Silver now, the prebiotics in mushrooms and
Mhm.
their role in the microbiome. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I'd be really interested to know.
Well, mushrooms have a lot of fiber in them, and the fiber is primarily in their cell wall. Their cell wall is made up of these beta glucans, which are polymers of sugar that are not digestible, that actually provide structural strength to the cell wall of the fungus. Okay. Um, and Within that cell wall and within those beta glucans, there also is a type of fiber called chitin. Now, chitin is an ingredient in the shells of lobsters, crabs. It's very hard. It's also part of the shell of many insects, and it's very poorly digestible. but it does have a prebiotic function. And this is one reason why mushrooms should not be eaten raw, but need to be eaten cooked. And when you cook them, you really need to cook them a bit. I like to, after I like to fry them, but then if you add a little water to it to kind of steam them up after you've heated them and fried them, this helps to break the cell wall, which releases the fiber so that one, the fiber can help your microbiome, but two, some of the fiber, the beta glucans, are actually signaling molecules to our immune cells in our gut, which then helps with gut immunity, but also helps with whole body immunity as well.
So what level are those chitins, Rob? Because chitins are very beneficial, say, for kidney patients who need to bind phosphorus. Is there a significant level of chitins in mushrooms?
There is a very significant level of chitins. The chitin that you're talking about that binds phosphorus has been modified. It's not strictly chitin. It has been chemically modified. But yes, we use that to bind phosphorus for our renal failure, our renal disease patients.
So would you advise feeding extra mushrooms to renal disease patients, or is there a special way to treat them to ensure that chitin is actually bioactive in terms of binding phosphorus?
Well, I think feeding mushrooms is great. It's natural, but mushrooms are 90% water. So in order to get a therapeutic dosage, you would have to give 10 times as much as you might give of a quarter or half a teaspoon of the extracted powder. So a company like Real Mushrooms, in addition to cultivating these mushrooms, processes them through hot water extraction and then dries them into a powder, analyzes them and standardizes them, and makes sure they don't have heavy metal contaminants and microbial contaminants and things along those lines. And then that's available for you to put into your pet's food because they use 1-to-1 extracts. That means that they use the hot water to extract the hot water soluble components, and they dry that, and then they put that back together with the fiber into a 1-to-1. So it winds up being very beneficial. An Australian colleague of yours, um, um, Lee Carroll. I'm not sure. I think he's in Queensland. He's a medical herbalist. He worked with Kerry Bone with MediHerb for many years. He's now doing his own work as a medical herbalist, and he's been talking about the value of chitin, and the value of the fiber in these mushrooms as well. So I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I'll get back.
That's okay. I was just wondering though that as this is all part of the microbiome and the way it works,
Mm-hmm.
are any of these products actually being trialed for use in kidney patients?
Yes, in fact, they have been, but it's not just the microbiome when it comes to the kidney, and thank you. That was where I was going to go with this, because there is one particular type of mushroom. It's a very interesting mushroom. It's called cordyceps, and cordyceps is known to have a benefit to the kidney. So I put cordyceps in my kidney disease formula, um, and so if you were to take the whole cordyceps with its fiber, it would be supportive of the kidney plus supportive of the microbiome as well. But I think it'd be much easier on a daily basis to take a quarter teaspoon or a half a teaspoon of this powder and mix it in with the food, versus a couple of tablespoons of the cooked mushrooms, daily into the food. So I think mushrooms. I think we're just in the infancy now, and my job with this company really is to highlight the essence of each mushroom in a single sentence, kind of a tag word kind of way for the pet consumer, the pet parent, to better understand which mushroom to choose when they have needs for it. And so I'm working on it. So cordyceps, think lung, think kidney, think stamina as well. It has these nucleosides called adenosine, which actually creates more ATP in the body. So it's no surprise that it's been used by performance athletes to help enhance their performance. We're going to be talking about it for agility. It's the agility mushroom.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I think where we're heading now in natural medicine is that we are starting to develop these products from real whole foods, but in a concentrated form, and that is absolutely brilliant. And that, of course, is where Gussie's Gut is going at the same time. So I think we're all heading in the right direction, Rob. But there's a lot of research that needs to be done, and there's just so much more to learn. And I'm listening to you, and I know I need to learn so much from you.
Well, the feeling's mutual, my friend. I'm speaking to the guy who started this whole raw food, concept. And I'm just really honored to count you as a friend and a colleague.
Thank you, and vice versa, indeed.
So let's talk about more about the biome. So when you get with all of your customers at Well Pet Dispensary, what's some of your most common questions or needs? Or just in in your background, your illustrious background. What are some of the needs that people are reaching out to you for?
It seems like the biggest question I get is really for pain and arthritis. And I think it's because we don't have really good tools for those, or at least we haven't had really good tools until we started looking at cannabis and looking at mushrooms as well. Cannabis um, is good for pain. So that doesn't speak directly to the microbiome, but we know that the health of the bowel governs everything. So after mobility, then we look at anxiety and those kinds of issues. And I think when we deal with that kind of mentation, that kind of anxiety, I think we are looking at a microbiome based issue also with respect to whatever they might be eating, because some foods are more likely to create inflammation or create problems with mentation. So mobility, anxiety are the two big ones, and then we start getting into actual real disease problems, with the epilepsy and the skin problems, and of course the digestive problems. And the digestive problems are big, but a lot of people don't really start out with the digestive problem. They speak to me first about their arthritis, but the fact that they can't use the NSAID because it gives their dog diarrhea. So my approach is not just to say, well, try a different NSAID, dude, or try some CBD, but what can we do to strengthen the bowel before we challenge it with something else? Because it's not about what you're giving the bowel, it's about the bowel. So that's where a tool such as what you guys have developed here could be really helpful. Just as we oftentimes recommend probiotics, and there's nothing wrong with probiotics, but it's kind of like, it's kind of like taking a fly swatter, to kind of knock down an eagle or something, because it's just inadequate. That when there's over 400 different species of bacteria and protozoa and fungi in your microbiome, how in the heck can you restore that with 1, 2, 4, 10, 16 organisms? You can't. Even if they come from the target animal, you can't, because it's an unnatural way of restoring things to the bowel. That's one reason why fecal transplants have gotten to be very popular, because they work. They work when probiotics don't.
Yeah.
I'd like to see, and I don't know enough about the stuff that you've made, although I eat fermented vegetables myself, and I think they're very tasty and everything. But I need to know more about how to use your product so that I can counsel my customers when their pets have issues with being able to handle supplements or drugs because their digestive system is so sensitive.
Yeah, that's great. Ian, I'll let you answer that question.
What was that?
The how to counsel his customers on how to feed Gus's gut.
Just before we talk about that, could I ask you, Rob, when you're dealing with particular disease syndromes and problems with the gut, and the use of various supplements or vitamins or mushrooms that you might have, do you also get them to change the diet, or ask them whether they will change the diet, or do you talk to them about diet?
Yes, absolutely. Everything, Ian. The digestive system is everything. So it's even their nervous state, the neurogenic aspect of it. So no, I it's quite a complicated um, problem to try to tease out. And oftentimes in my context as, the website owner who's, dealing with customer service and trying to give some answers that are good answers, but can't really get into the in-depth back and forth. Well, what are you feeding? Have you tried this or that? But yes, when I'm definitely in a practice oriented situation, everything is on the table when it comes to
Yeah.
digestion.
Because the good news is, of course, if you change the diet to raw, for example, and a properly balanced raw, then you're actually going to encourage a different microbiota altogether to that which is being produced from a diet based on cooked grain. So, and that's always been fundamental to me. So yes, and I totally agree with you that just adding one probiotic something or other rather than a compound probiotic, which, and the best is, of course, is a fecal transplant. Um, just adding one or two is not going to be nearly as effective. And I like your analogy of a fly swatter to an eagle or whatever. But we've just using our product. I think that we are trialing it mostly by actually either spraying some water on top of it. We don't want it to actually be inhaled. It's a powder, so we don't want it to be inhaled and cause respiratory problems. But just sprinkling it on top of the food and then maybe spraying it with water or mixing it with water before you add it to the food. I mean, it really is that simple. Just so long as you get that amount mixed with the food. I think we've got a long way to go to learn how to properly use this product. It's a brilliant product, but like everything else, we now have this steep learning curve, and we're interested to see how people go, what they do with it, and the various ways you could use it to improve the microbiome. But always, the long view for me is to gradually get people to use it together with a more and more properly balanced raw food diet. Then they're going to see the full benefits of the product and they're going to see a much healthier animal.
Do you think there's a problem if you were to use it with like a kibble, which isn't really considered to be all that healthy? It would actually help improve the value of the kibble?
We hope it will. We think it
Mhm.
will. But again, the ultimate aim is to say, well, hey, you're doing this. This is
Mhm.
actually a whole food and it's produced from a raw product that's been fermented. Now let's go the next step and let's get your animal really healthy. So it's almost like the catalyst in some ways. Yes, it's going to do some good by itself, but if it actually does some good by stimulating the pet parent to do more than just add this and begin to think seriously about the diet, then you're going to get the full benefit. And this was really when Rob told me about what he was doing, I realized that this was the one thing that was actually missing from the raw food diet, a good source of microorganisms that would actually do something to the microbiome in the way that a dog would naturally get their microbiome, seeded naturally through eating buried bones, and that can't happen a lot in dogs that are sitting inside a house all day and never get out into the earth or a garden, which is happening more and more. The way that dogs would eat feces, they're coprophagic. Again, we can't encourage that because it's not a great idea and it's rather offensive. So we're mimicking all of those things as best we can and trying to make the life of the dog as natural as possible, as far and in tune with its evolutionary background, in a domestic setting where we just can't allow the dog to eat poo, eat buried bones, perhaps lick the backside of 100 different dogs every day. So yes, we are trying to get to that point and then encourage the owner, the pet parent, to then think about the diet as well as the addition of this brilliant product.
You've said so many things, Rob, that I just wanted to jump in and interject. There's an interesting thing. I'm sure you both have seen it in your all your years of practice, which is as people go down the path with their animals and their animals develop an illness or a disease or a sensitivity, or you can name many of those issues. As they go down that path, they narrow more and more and more what they're feeding and what they're choosing to give their animals, and so their animals have a lower, smaller spectrum of nutrients in what they're allowed to eat. Some of them are down to the most rare of meats and like one or two vegetables. So through fermentation, what we know is that it allows, not in 100% of cases, but an animal that's, say, sensitive to kale, just as an example. When it's fermented, it's so much easier to digest. It removes things like oxalates, the majority of oxalates that may be an issue for a dog or an animal. And it makes it obviously much more nutritious because you're unlocking what's in that kale much easier. It's very much like in chlorella, how they break the cell wall so you can access what's in chlorella. Well, that's exactly what happens in fermentation. And then on the other point that you brought up, which I think is a super, very, very good point. Look, it's expensive to feed dogs, and especially if you have several dogs. And the folks that are feeding, let's say, kibble or a mixture of kibble and wet, or a blend of all three, raw, wet, kibble. What we also do know is that fermentation, eating fermented foods with any food that you're eating, it makes that nutrition a lot more bioavailable to you. So we could, I think, very comfortably say that eating fermented foods like that of Gussie's gut allows you to access what's in that kibble. So what you're actually paying for, your dog can actually access that nutrition a lot more. So.
Mm-hmm. I understand Dr. Billinghurst's point of view, and how he's very passionate about diet. He's very passionate about raw diets, and I completely appreciate that. And I agree with his passion. Not so much raw diet specifically as the biologically appropriate diet for a given individual, which may vary, but I think that there are a lot of folks out there that either don't have the time or the motivation or the skills or the money to pursue these higher order diets, which I agree are much better. And kibble is why we're able to have so many animals and feed them, maybe not optimally, but feed them sufficiently. So it'd be good to know that for those that can't make the change, that they're still going to get some benefit with this.
I think there's no doubt about that, Rob. There's definitely, as Rob just, our other Rob just described. Yes. But from my point of view as a physician who's been dealing with individual cases for so long, I do know that in the face of disease, then let's go the whole hog and get them onto a biologically appropriate diet, which is appropriate for that individual. And that's where we try to aim. But in the meantime, I also say, if it ain't broke, let's not try to fix it, because sometimes in trying to fix something that ain't broke, we do more harm than good. But also, having said that, sometimes we can't see the slow harm that is being done. Well, we don't actually, in any cases, by inappropriate diet. But let's start where we are. We have a sick animal or we have healthy animals. Let's get something into them, like Gussie's gut, that is going to make the food they are having more bioavailable, more available in a healthy way, and indeed later on maybe go that extra step. But yes, I agree with you. It's going to make a difference, and that's the important point.
That's a really good question. Let's just take a quick question. I want to get you guys.
Oh, good. You're getting some.
Yeah, I got some questions live. We get to take them
Oh,
live,
wow.
Rob.
I just noticed. I just clicked that button there. Wow, cool.
Technology. So Lisa, we love Lisa. Hey, Lisa. On Facebook, and you can submit questions in the comments below, folks. So wherever you're watching this, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube. Unfortunately, on Twitter, you can't. So if you want to ask any questions, just go on Facebook or YouTube. Could you discuss the major destroyers of the gut and the things that pet parents should do, if possible, at all, should avoid if possible, at all costs, in order to protect the precious gut health system? Vaccines, kibble, antibiotics, etc. Who wants to
From
take
my
that?
point of view, one of the biggest ones, and I identified this from the word go, was the gluten in most of the grain-based products. Gluten intolerance, and gluten tolerance doesn't necessarily affect the gut in a complete and wholesome way where it actually strips all the villi out of the gut, but over time it does erode the health of the gut, and that to me is probably the biggest danger. Combine that with the carbohydrates present in these foods, and we have that pro-inflammatory action going on, and then marry that up with the fact that you're actually producing a poor microbiome in terms of gut health, and these foods are doing nothing at all to help the health of the gut. And we see this all the time in all these inflammatory bowel diseases, these overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. Everything we see, to my mind, has been related to these processed pet foods, and to me they are the biggest danger. Then there are other things that do impact on it, like vaccines and antibiotics. However, antibiotics are life-saving in many places, and you actually have to give them. If you can give them intravenously, so much the better. But again, that's a major cost because you've got to hospitalize an animal or do special things. But Rob, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, you won't hear much differently from me, Ian. Like yourself, I believe that the processed kibble diets are among the worst offenders in terms of creating a pro-inflammatory environment in the bowel, contributing to leaky gut, and also giving them insufficient nutrition. Carbohydrates are many times empty and don't have nutrients with them, and so dogs keep eating more of them to get the nutrients they're not getting. But there's some things like vaccines, for instance, which I think may be more of an individual problem. We see some individuals having more sensitivity than others, and I would and I know there's a lot of controversy these days with vaccinations and everything else, but I think that the purpose of vaccinations is to protect is to protect populations from serious epidemic types of diseases. And so, if there is risk in your community for, let's say, parvovirus or distemper or rabies, the best solution is to, in my opinion, is to vaccinate. And the problems that it can create with the gut can be remediated through improved diet. It can be remediated
Absolutely.
through Gussie's gut. It can be remediated through a variety of ways, because it's generally not a permanent thing. Mushrooms, beta glucans. We recommend taking mushrooms and beta glucans before vaccinations to get better protective titers, for instance. So I'm just saying that in all of life, there needs to be a balance. And I think sometimes our social media and all the talking heads in our world that we're so glommed onto, with our digital media, focus on the wrong things. They don't look at the big picture, which is the protection of life, the protection of quality of life. And sometimes you have to take a little hit to avoid a bigger hit. So I'm just, it doesn't have anything really to do with Gussie's gut, but I just had to weigh in on that in terms of my own personal philosophy. But it does relate to Gussie's gut in that we have tools we can use, that there's many things which could be damaging to the gut that we can remediate, we can protect if we just use them properly.
Well said.
Yep. And I know that many of your clients and customers are on, and just for their sake, I'll tell you our first formula, Rob, has we call it antioxidant. It's an antioxidant formula designed specifically for that. So it contains spinach, kale, parsley, green cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, wild blueberries, not the regular blueberries that you find in the store, fresh rosemary, fresh oregano, grass-fed goat kefir, alfalfa, and kelp for micronutrients. And then we use Redmond's Real Salt, which is mined out of Salt Lake City. It's very, very, very clean salt. Whereas we're starting to find that Himalayan and Celtic salt isn't as clean as it used to be. This salt seems to be head and shoulders above that at the moment. And then we use organic Romano and Parmesan cheese that we add to it for just a little bit of flavor. But what we're also surprised to find is we have a holistic veterinarian that claims she has the most finicky dog on the planet. And this dog just...
I think I know her.
Yeah, right. And in fact, we have her on the podcast coming up. I think it's Monday, or no, it's Sunday, actually. It's your Monday, Ian. Oh. And so she'll be talking about that. But, her dog loved Gussie's gut. And I think it goes a little bit to what Ian talks about, which is that you could trust your dog's intuition. They know instinctively what they want and need. And so when they're eating things like grass, or unfortunately even feces and buried bones that stink, they instinctively know that this is something that's good for them and they should, eat it.
I don't know if we should get into poop eating too much here.
No,
but I don't think it's a bad thing, unless they come and lick you afterwards. It's their instinctual way of fecal transplant. They're trying to restore their microbiome. And if this was a perfect world and they were all out hunting and gathering in the wilderness, their poop wouldn't stink. Their poop would be good for them, generally.
Yep.
But it does have a kind of a distasteful thought, I must admit.
Yeah, it makes us cringe.
Maybe you.
Actually, I always relate the story of my early experience with poop eating dogs, where they're eating this terrible dry dog food. And I always point out that the poop that they're eating at the back end is far more nutritious than the stuff that was producing that poop at the front end. But that's a whole story we could talk about. Rob, I've got one very important question. Can you very quickly outline some of the diseases you believe mushrooms can be beneficial for?
I can. They all, and specific mushrooms may be good for specific problems, but generically, in terms of the entire body of medicinal mushrooms, because of their beta-glucan content and because of their triterpene content, they all have very potent anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Plus, with their benefit to the microbiome, you have this immune enhancing benefit as well. And that's general with all mushrooms. But then you look at a mushroom like, let's say, Ganoderma lucidum, which is known as reishi or lingzhi. And reishi mushroom has triterpenes in it, in addition to the beta-glucans and everything else, which actually stop mast cells from degranulating. It has an antihistaminic effect. So you combine that with its beta-glucan content and its ability to modulate the immune system, and you've got something that could be a good partner to use when you have animals with either food or inhalant allergies. There's another mushroom, which you can't get in Australia, but Dr. Fougere did manage to get some mycelium from them. She's cultivating it she's not far from you in Sydney. And lion's mane, which looks like a brain, if you know about the doctrine of signatures, lion's mane contains molecules in it that actually stimulate new nerve growth function in the brain. It also has the ability to settle down your thoughts without sedating you. It just helps you to organize your thoughts and kind of reduces anxiety. So we look at lion's mane for those effects. And it's interestingly enough, lion's mane is the best selling mushroom of every mushroom that Real Mushroom sells. and they sell globally in many places, not to Australia yet, which speaks to the mental state of our planet right now. Everyone needs something for that. You look at turkey tail. Turkey tail is available globally. It's all over the world. Turkey tail is known by native peoples everywhere for its ability to treat cancer. And there's very good studies supporting its effectiveness in most species, although we don't have a good study in the animals. And they've been able to derive specific pharmaceutical extracts from the turkey tail that they use in Japan or China concurrently with chemotherapy to improve outcomes in humans. So there's turkey tail for you, you know. Shiitake mushroom has an antioxidant in it that's unique to fungal species called ergothioneine. And mushrooms also produce glutathione. So ergothioneine and glutathione are two of the most potent antioxidants there are, and we get them in those lovely little shiitake mushrooms that grow on wood. They grow from Japan. They grow on the Shia evergreen oak tree in Japan.
Wow.
I mean, I could go on. There's so many different, we talked about cordyceps. I mentioned cordyceps earlier for the adenosine in it. So, and chaga. Chaga is a fascinating, it's not really a mushroom. It's a canker. It's a fungus that grows into the birch tree, and it's only present in northern latitudes like Finland, Siberia, and the northern latitudes in Canada. And it grows like a canker. It looks like cancer growing on the tree. And like with the doctrine of signatures for lion's mane, chaga has been used to treat cancer. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Prize winning author, wrote a book called Cancer Ward because he got cancer while he was in the Gulag, where he wrote his Gulag Archipelago, and he cured himself drinking chaga tea. So the mushrooms are a gift to us on this planet, to keep us healthy. But fungal species and mushrooms themselves are a gift to our planet because they are the major recyclers. They elaborate digestive enzymes that degrade that poop that the dog just pooed on the floor, or the dead animal over here, or this dead worm or this dead bush. It's up to the fungus to degrade it so it can become part of the soil again. So mushrooms are amazing. And
that's how people are.
Is this going in your new book?
Yeah,
I'm working on it, my friend. Yeah.
Because this book is a required text out there. You need to get it done quickly, but of course, fully as you would.
I'm working on it. There's so much incoming stuff every day. I'm getting up earlier. Rob says he's getting up at 5 these days. So
Rob, that's easy for Ian to say, to get your book out quick, but
well, he's only written can you see I've got a couple of your books right up here, Ian. I've got your Pointing to the Bone book. Did
you pay retail for them?
No, I think he sent me that.
Oh.
Yeah, I think, and he signed it too. Nice guy that he is, So, but I think I sent him my book on medical marijuana, so it was fair trade. And I've got one of your early copies of Feed Your Dog a Bone. I just discovered it yesterday in a pile.
I don't think I think you might have sent me some notes on medical. I've got to get you a hold of that book, Rob. I really do.
Yeah, definitely should. Sending it to Australia, that's always seems kind of daunting, but I guess these days the globe is shrinking.
It's not daunting. It's just expensive.
Yes,
very expensive. We have a question here that I want to get to real quick because
there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, we're coming up on our hour, so
okay.
This has been great. It's flown by. So, where did that question go that we had with Tina? It was about the best. Here we go. Here we go. Led right into your question from Tina Austin. Thank you, Tina, for your question on Facebook. What kind of mushroom would you recommend for dogs with high alt liver enzymes? How much and how often?
And I see you're in Canada, Tina, right? You can get. We're working on getting our products through Amazon Canada. Right now, you can get them through a company called Eastern Currents. But there's several mushrooms which have been shown to have what we call hepatoprotective properties. So the one I had just mentioned before, the reishi, I think is probably is my personal favorite mushroom. It's considered the mushroom of immortality. It's very, very bitter. And the bitterness actually is a taste that we know helps to treat liver disease. It has potent anti-inflammatory activity. I would suggest getting it in capsule form because it is so bitter. The only way I can take it is in my espresso, and even then, it's a tad bit bitter. But I take 1.5 grams of it every morning myself, and I take it religiously. I bow down and go, "Oh, reishi, take it." No, I'm joking. But so I would do that. But look at some other herbs as well, Tina, as far as milk thistle and the silymarin that it contains. Dandelion, turmeric, these are really good herbs that can help to support liver function. We need to find out why they're elevated. That always helps too.
Yeah, and Rob, you said Eastern Currents provides your product in Canada. Is it this one right here?
Yes, that one. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and yeah, I'm
Okay,
pretty sure
great.
that's the story. Mhm.
Okay, great, real good. Well, let's end. Ian, do you have any other parting questions? I'll give you the last question if you have one.
No, I think I asked the most important one, which is when is Rob going to get his book out? And he couldn't answer me.
Not
Only
soon
question-
enough. Not soon enough. I'm
only
sure that
question he couldn't answer. That's right.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you, Rob, very much, and
My
we're
pleasure.
very excited to have you, and we're also really excited to kick off some of our product on your website, and
Mhm.
can't wait to do that as well. Get this in the hands of more people. So,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time today, Rob. This has been so great.
My
It's
pleasure.
been
It's
fantastic.
good to see you, Ian, and always good to see you, Rob. And as
Same.
you will.
All right, have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Take care.